Meet the computer you can talk to. With Copilot on Windows, working, creating, and collaborating is as easy as talking. Got writer's block? Share your screen with Copilot Vision to help spark inspiration, and use Copilot Voice to have a conversation and brainstorm ideas. Or maybe you need some tech help. With Copilot Vision, Copilot sees what you see. Let Copilot talk you through step-by-step guidance so you can master new apps, games, and skills faster. Try now at windows.com/Copilot.
Retirement isn't just about closing out your career. It's living the life you've always dreamed of. With New York Life, you get the financial guidance to make it real. Start today at nyl.com.
Welcome back, True Crime Army. I am your host, Margot, and this is Military Murder. If you're new here, welcome. And to all my longtime listeners, hey. Here are the cliff notes for this show. Every Monday, I release an episode about a true crime case with a military connection. Typically, that connection is an active duty military member or veteran who is either the perpetrator or the victim of a crime. Once a month, I cover headline cases to keep us all up to date on some of the most shocking headlines affecting the military community today. And I do this all with one goal in mind, to remind you to remain vigilant always. Today, I am back with the conclusion of the Andersen Air Force Base Commissary Heist from the 90s. Now, if you haven't had a chance to listen to part 1, pause right now, go back and listen to part 1, and then catch me back here where I pick up exactly where I left off. With that, join me today as I bring you the conclusion of the tragic story involving Sergeant Stacy Levay. Now, let's keep digging.
Military murder is an independent project and is not endorsed by the Department of Defense or any military component. The views expressed are those of the host. The content of this podcast is not meant to be legal or medical advice. Warning, this episode contains graphic details of murder and is not suitable for young listeners. Listener discretion is advised.
Last time, I left off with the scene at Andersen Air Force Base in absolute chaos. 2 airmen had been brutally attacked, 1 stabbed and 1 bludgeoned, and the getaway vehicle was later found burned. To top it off, Senior Airman Jose Simoy tried to create an alibi by calling the Guam PD to report his sister's red Toyota Camry stolen hours after it had already been found on fire. Now, let's pick up at the hospital, because while law enforcement was scrambling across base, doctors were fighting desperately to save 2 lives. When Sergeant Stacy Levay arrived at the emergency room, doctors were able to detect a heart rate and blood pressure, but Levay was not breathing on his own. Once at the ER, doctors immediately intubated him and connected him to a ventilator. As the medical team examined him, they found several jagged cuts on the back of his scalp. They found a large hematoma pooling beneath the skin, and they found a blood clot along the back of Sergeant Levay's neck. There were no defensive wounds. There were no other injuries. Everything was concentrated on the back of his head and neck, consistent with massive blunt force trauma. A neurological exam was performed, and the findings were devastating. Levay's pupils were fixed and dilated, indicating the brainstem was no longer functioning. He showed no movement, no response, no reflexes. His Glasgow Coma Scale, which is the measure that doctors use to assess brain function, was a 3. That number, added with the fact that there was no movement, no response, and no reflexes, showed that essentially Sergeant Levay was brain dead. Now, I did read through the ER provider's testimony on all the tests that were run when Sergeant Levay arrived at the hospital, and the tests were extensive. They don't just do one test and call it a day. They do various tests, including taking him off the ventilator long enough to see if there is any type of activity. They even do a test called cold water calorics, where essentially they sit the patient up at roughly a 30-degree angle. They then pour cold ice water in one ear. If the person has brainstem function, that person's eyes typically shift towards the side of the cold water. When that test was performed on Sergeant Levay, there was absolutely no movement. And if all of this doesn't already break your heart, here's what makes this case even harder to listen to. December 29th, the night of this attack, was Sergeant Levay's 29th birthday. And on top of that, he was also a newlywed. So let's talk about the other victim, Tech Sergeant Mark Wart. Tech Sergeant Donald Mark Wart arrived at the ER around the same time as Sergeant Levay. Now, you'll remember that Markwart had a sucking chest wound, and in self-aid buddy care, if you've been in the military members are taught that these types of wounds must be sealed immediately to keep air from escaping. But Markwart was bleeding so heavily that when paramedics arrived, they couldn't get the seal to stick. Thankfully, Markwart was still conscious, barely, and he was able to hold pressure over his own wound during the ambulance trip. Once he was in the ER, doctors quickly assessed Markwart's wounds. The first stab wound was a deep cut across the neck. The second was a chest wound that caused his lung to collapse. Upon arrival, doctors inserted a chest tube to reinflate the lung and to drain the blood. And that neck wound, that was especially horrific. The knife entered on the left side of his neck and tracked across the right, slicing right through the jugular veins and cutting deep into the muscles near the trachea. Had the knife actually gone millimeters deeper, it would have severed his carotid artery or pierced his windpipe. Miraculously, though, Sergeant Markwart survived. And you know what? For several days, so did Sergeant Levay. For the next 3 days, the medical staff kept Sergeant Levay alive on artificial support. But all this time, they were conducting repeated neurological tests. Sadly, though, there was never any improvement for Sergeant Levay. On January 1st, once his family arrived from the States, the difficult decision was made to remove him from life support. Sergeant Stacy Levay passed away soon after. 2 days later, the autopsy confirmed what everyone already knew. Sergeant Levay's cause of death was blunt force trauma to the head and neck. The manner of death? Homicide. Sergeant Levay had been struck at least 5 times, causing the scalp lacerations and a fatal cerebral hemorrhage. The investigation into the Andersen Air Force Base robbery and murder was immediate and intense. And right away, Senior Airman Jose Simoy shot to the top of the suspect list. Why? Well, because of that red Toyota. He had been the one to sign it onto base, and he was the one who reported it stolen after it had already been discovered burnt to a crisp. Jose Simoy was also conveniently on leave during the heist. During the weeks-long investigation, investigators discovered the broken chain on the perimeter fence, and stuck in that chain link was a piece of molding that they would later tie to that red Toyota Camry. And not only was there molding stuck to the fence, but there was also paint transfer. And guess what? It was the same color as Jose Simoy's sister's car. Now, I'm not sure about you, but throughout this entire case, I kept thinking about Simoy's sister. Like, did she actually give him permission to even borrow the car, or did he just take it and then burn it to a crisp, Once investigators discovered the perimeter's escape route, which wasn't until much later, they did put together various teams to recover evidence along the route. The team consisted of the Security Police Squadron, the Air Force OSI, the FBI, and even the Explosive Ordnance Disposal Technicians. They all searched the area around the escape route. And while EOD techs aren't actually law enforcement, they have tools that are perfect for ground searches, like high-sensitivity metal detectors. With this type of equipment, it didn't take long for evidence to appear. A security police airman found a knife lying in the brush, an EOD tech located a lead pipe, and a second pipe was found stuck in a tree. And alongside the road, investigators recovered 4 unopened cans of Budweiser, the same kind that Jose purchased before the heist. And once it was further examined, remember that piece of molding that was caught in the fence that I just talked about? Well, that was identified as belonging to a Camry, which was the same model as the one owned by Jose's sister. And remember when I said that they found the burned out car? Well, guess what? It was actually burnt out. Like, it was burnt to a crisp. Guess what didn't burn? The license plate. That's right. It was intact. AEG 774. Kind of sounds like poetic justice if you ask me. Well, with that license plate number, investigators had a direct link between the crime scene on Andersen Air Force Base and Jose Simoy himself. At the end of the day, Jose Simoy was not a criminal mastermind. Jose was actually quite sloppy. Now, I'm not sure why Jose wasn't immediately arrested, but Jose's commander did terminate his leave and recalled him to duty on December 30th. On January 1st, just hours after Sergeant Levay was removed from life support, Jose was assigned to the main gate. I bet certainly not in a law enforcement capacity. The next day, Simoy's first sergeant placed him on a 3-day work detail at Andersen South, which is a housing area 4 miles from the main base. That team was preparing sleeping quarters for an upcoming exercise. Jose Simoy was supposed to report to the detail on January 2nd, 3rd, and again on Monday the 6th. But the job wrapped up early, and all 20 airmen, including Jose, they were told to report to a new detail back on main base starting on January 6th, which was just after the weekend. Well, on January 6th, Jose Simoy didn't show up. He disappeared. He went on the run. The only real problem, though, about Jose Simoy's grand escape plan was he was on Guam, a tiny island in the middle of the Pacific, 30 miles long by 9 miles wide. There aren't many places to hide on the island, and there are only two ways off the island, a ship or an airplane. Flying commercial would require ID and a lot of money, so instead, Simoy set his sights on slipping away aboard a civilian cargo ship, and he even considered a tugboat. But he had a destination in mind. Simoy wanted to end up in the Philippines, and there was a reason for him wanting to go to the Philippines. At the time, the U.S. didn't have an extradition treaty with the Philippines, meaning that Jose Simoy was trying to evade capture at all costs. But before he could escape the island, he needed somewhere to lie low. He couldn't go home, he couldn't go to his family's house. Everyone was being watched. So he called the one person he thought he could still intimidate, Jesus Ramos. Jesus was the one who was supposed to have been part of the heist, but he backed out. Well, he still received $1,000 in hush money, and Simoy was counting on leveraging that. Jesus picked Jose up, drove him to retrieve his car, and followed him to an auto repair shop. That was where Simoy ditched his vehicle. Then they went to a grocery store, and Simoy sent Jesus inside to buy canned goods and rice. At first, Simoy planned to disappear into the mountains. Then he had a change of heart. They drove to the village of Mongmong, but Simoy couldn't find the house he was looking for. So they continued on to Agate, where Jesus eventually dropped him off. While he was on the run, Jose tried to track down the two Filipino H-2 workers, Tikboy and Nito, one of whom had stabbed Tech Sergeant Margot, but both men had vanished. When Jesus dropped Jose off, Jose gave him a chilling warning. If you squeal, I know what to do. And Jesus understood exactly what he meant. Jose meant that if Jesus spoke to police, Jose Simoy would have him killed.
This is Charlie. He's my part rescue dog, part whirlwind. Half of his breakfast always ends up on the floor. And he leaves fur everywhere. That's why I grabbed the Bissell Power Clean Fur Finder. It's cordless, powerful, and actually finds fur you don't even see. If you've got a pet like Charlie, you've got fur everywhere. The Power Clean Fur Finder gets that. Discover how Power Clean Fur Finder makes pet cleanups effortless at Bissell.com.
Say hello to the all-new Alexa Plus and see how Alexa can do so much more for you. Need tickets to see your favorite artist? Craving your comfort restaurant? Just sit back, relax, and talk naturally. Alexa's on it. It learns your style, anticipates what's next, and makes it happen across Echo, Fire TV, and more. Learn more at Amazon.com/new Alexa.
For the next 10 days, Jose drifted between couches, hiding wherever he could while trying to line up an escape. He even had a friend buy him a wig, a hat, eyeglasses, and an earring so that he could disguise himself. He even grew like a little mustache and some facial hair. And every time he needed someone to purchase something, he pulled out a crisp $100 bill, part of his stolen cash, and he told people to call him Jesse, not Jose. He started using aliases like Jesse Villacruz and Jesse Dela Cruz. He thought he was clever, but he wasn't, because after more than a week on the run, the FBI and OSI agents tracked him down. They found Jose Simoy hiding in a bedroom closet inside a civilian home off base. As Special Agent Rick Bergeron handcuffed him, Jose, wearing his wig and earring, looked up and said, "Man, I'm sorry, I was railroaded into doing it. I was looking for the other 4 guys." He then added, "I can't understand how you guys knew I was here. I was going under another name." Well, ya busted. After he was taken in, the Air Force changed Jose's duty status from AWOL, which was listed from January 6th to January 17th, to in confinement, basically pretrial confinement. After his arrest, Simoy was interviewed by the FBI and OSI, and he did make a statement. But before I go into that, let's talk about the money. Remember, Jose got a whopping $7,000 out of the robbery, but by the time he was arrested, just like 3 weeks after the heist, he only had $3,200 left, which was actually recovered by investigators. Okay, so let's get into Jose Simoy's interrogation, and let me just prelude that with Jose's explanation for the attack is ridiculous, and investigators saw right through it. Basically, Jose claimed that on December 29th, he went to base to check his mailbox at the post office near Building 21,000. While he was there, he ran into 3 friends who were locals who asked for a ride to the cockfights. Jose agreed, and they were like, hey, meet us out back, just like swing the car around and meet us there. Jose got his mail, he drove behind the post office to pick up the men, and that was where he just happened to witness 4 people fighting with a security police officer. The 4 attackers then saw Jose's car, ran, and forced themselves inside. Jose then said he couldn't help Sergeant Levay even if he wanted to because it all happened so fast. And according to Simoy, he was outnumbered by the real perpetrators. As Jose drove away, one man ordered him to stop the car, then got out and did something to a person who had just parked, which, by the way, is Tech Sergeant Margot. That was the entire story, point blank. He was an innocent bystander. Yeah, Jose was there, but he was trying to paint himself as an unwilling participant, a victim who got caught up in the wrong place at the wrong time. The thing is that no one believed this version of events, especially because he admitted that he burned his sister's car to a crisp. Why would he do that if he had nothing to do with what went down, you know? Now, when investigators asked how these civilian friends who don't have access to base got on base, Jose claimed that they were contractors with base access. Okay, so they asked him, so if they have base access, why did they need a ride? Where was their car? Crickets. Soon after this, Jose Simoy stopped talking and he requested an attorney. Yikes, he really should have requested an attorney way sooner. But anyway, with that, Jose Simoy was charged with conspiracy to commit a robbery, felony murder, attempted murder, and 2 counts of robbery, one for stealing $74,000 from the commissary and one for stealing Sergeant Levay's service weapon and radio. And finally, he was also charged with desertion. And listen, because the evidence was overwhelming, Jose's defense team offered 3 separate plea deals to the convening authority. His first plea offer was, I will plead guilty if my sentence is capped at 30 years. His second plea offer was to plead guilty if the sentence was capped at life without parole. And when that failed, he submitted a third plea offer. And that third offer was to move the case to federal court, not a court-martial, and with prison being capped at life without parole. So he offered to plead guilty to all of these things, and in addition to not receiving the death penalty, Jose was willing to divulge information about other crimes that were occurring on the island. For example, he had information about cocaine and meth importation to Guam. He had information about arsons. He had information about people forging U.S. passports. He even had information about poaching on Andersen Air Force Base by security policemen. Jose tried everything to save his rear, including attempting to sell himself as an informant. Well, guess what? All 3 offers were rejected. And with that, the convening authority referred the case as a capital court-martial, meaning the death penalty was on the table if he was convicted of felony murder. So basically, the only charge that could lead to a death sentence was murder. Senior Airman Jose F. Simoy's court-martial began on July 8, 1992. He faced 4 charges: conspiracy, murder, attempted murder, and robbery. The jury would not have to decide on the desertion charge because prior to the court-martial, Jose Simoy pled guilty to that charge. This, I do want to remind you, was a capital case, meaning that the death penalty was on the table, so the stakes were very high. They were even higher in this case because, remember, the government wasn't arguing that Jose Simoy was the one who actually physically killed Sergeant Levay. They were arguing that he was the mastermind. But for Jose Simoy, there would have been no heist and Sergeant Levay would still be alive. The prosecution team was led by Major Israel Wellner, who was the circuit trial counsel, and Captain Sigurd Krols, the trial counsel. Simoy's defense team was made up of Major Bernard Doyle, who was the circuit defense counsel, Captain James Bemis, who was the area defense counsel, and a civilian attorney, Mr. Howard Trapp. The presiding judge was Colonel Michael Kilroy. Over the course of 2 weeks, the prosecution presented an overwhelming amount of evidence. During their opening statements, the prosecution led the jury through the evidence that they would be hearing. They called Jose Simoy the schemer, the mastermind. He was the one who dreamt up the plan of robbing the commissary during the holidays. He was the one who recruited the team. He was the one who led the dry run. He assigned the positions. He gave the order. If they die, they die. During their presentation of the evidence, the prosecution laid out the puzzle pieces for the jury. Their first witness was a security policeman. Actually, it was the security policeman who let Jose Simoy fill out his own paperwork on December 29th. The second witness was Peregrina Armour. She took the stand and she described working at the commissary. She had actually previously held other positions on base. But she told the jurors about the commissary cash drop, how they were supposed to go. She even testified that she knew Jose Simoy because he had escorted her from the commissary to the bank for the cash drops on prior occasions. She told the jurors about the 2 random calls to the commissary just before the attack. Remember, she got a call asking about what time they closed, and then there was another call about a check or whatever. When Peregrina asked the caller's name, they said St. Nicholas. Peregrina described the attack, at least 2 masked men. She described being punched in the stomach and being knocked unconscious. And of course, she testified to everything that I've already laid out. Tech Sergeant Margot also testified. He didn't actually know Jose Simoy, but on December 29th, he was just minding his own business, trying to get back to work to just finish up a few things. He described that even after he was attacked, he was in shock. He didn't know what was happening. He exited his car and even told the security policeman that had just chased the other car, off the lot. He was like, damn, man, why did they have to stab me like that? He was lucid at the time, but then he quickly got lightheaded and had to sit down. Of course, the jury also heard from ER providers, the medical examiner, the investigators, including security police, OSI, FBI agents, forensic experts, eyewitnesses, and they even heard from people who participated in these crimes with Jose Simoy. That's right, Jesus Ramos and Joseph Che Wolford testified against their boy Simoy.
This episode is brought to you by Blink. Doom scrolling during this ad break? Ditch the doom and get peace of mind with new Blink 2K Plus Smart Security. Check on home from your phone with 2K Clarity, noise cancellation, and 4x zoom. Plus, setup is so simple, you can easily install while listening to your favorite podcast. True crime girlies, we got you. Get more, spend less with Blink 2K Plus Smart Security.
This episode is brought to you by Netflix. Jay Kelly, the new film from Academy Award nominee Noah Baumbach. George Clooney stars as an actor confronting his past and present on a journey of self-discovery, alongside Adam Sandler as his devoted manager. Critics are calling it a declaration of love to the chaotic art of filmmaking, with the Wall Street Journal praising it as a transcendent comedy drama. Jay Kelly is now playing only on Netflix.
Jesus testified in Tagalog, so there was an interpreter there for his portion of the testimony. Jesus testified that he first met Jose Simoy on December 22nd, after a friend told him that they were planning on making money during what he called a holdup. On the stand, Jesus basically laid the foundation that Jose Simoy was in fact the mastermind. He was in charge of the heist. He even stood in front of the jury and replicated a drawing that Jose made for him. It was Jose's game plan for the heist. And Jesus stood there and he drew buildings and X's for where everyone was told to stand. I mean, not for nothing, but that's pretty powerful testimony. Jesus also testified that Jose told him to bring a gun. And even though he didn't own a gun, he did borrow a .25 caliber handgun from a friend. Jesus also testified about all the failed robbery attempts. And then finally, he admitted that he wasn't there on the day of the actual heist. But on New Year's Eve, he bumped into 2 of the other participants, and they gave him a little bundle. They told him it was $1,000, but when Jesus went home and counted the money, it was only $980. Jesus didn't see Jose until January 3rd, when Jose showed up paranoid, saying that they needed to go on the run. Eventually, after Jose Simoy got caught, the FBI did show up to interview Jesus, and he admitted to the jury that he lied to the investigators on various occasions, but finally, he confessed to what he knew. On the stand, Jesus was able to tell the jury that he was also up for conspiracy charges in this case, and that as part of his arrangements with authorities, he had agreed to testify against the others. Che Wolford also testified against Jose Simoy, and right off the bat, Che testified that he initially lied to the FBI, but that same day that they had come to interview him, he decided to come forward truthfully because he wanted to avoid the death penalty after reading about the case in the newspapers. But before speaking to investigators, Che wanted a deal. The U.S. attorney did agree to a deal, but they weren't specific. That was enough for Che Wolford to sing like a canary. Ultimately, Che told the jury that he was convicted of robbery, and while sentencing was still pending at the time of the trial or the court-martial, he was facing 9 to 15 years behind bars. So what exactly did he tell investigators after he had his deal in hand? Well, Che testified that Jose approached him about a week before Christmas with his plan. Initially, Che thought Jose was out of his mind, crazy really. But Jose was convincing, and he told him about a robbery at a naval station where the robbers never got caught. And that was all it took for Che to be like, okay, fine, I guess I'll help. But the thing about this is that even then, when Che woke up on December 29th, he had no idea that that would be the day. In fact, he testified that at about 5 p.m. that day, he was home barbecuing when Jose showed up and was like, we're doing this thing tonight. You in? Che tended to kind of second guess himself. Should he go? Should he not go? But ultimately, he went with Jose and the others. Che also told the jury that before leaving the house, Jose told him to bring his gun, and he did. On the way to Andersen Air Force Base, Jose stopped and picked up the 2 Filipino workers. And for the first time, I heard that Che had never met those men before that night. So no kidding, they're like on their way to commit a crime. Jose pulls over, picks up these Filipino workers, and Che had never met them before. During his testimony, Che delivered 2 of the most chilling statements of the trial. He introduced the statements that came from Jose Simoy. If the guy dies, he dies. Now, that was a statement made by Jose when they were discussing hitting the security policeman with the pipe. And then there was the other line, yeah, kill him. And that was when they were discussing Sergeant Margot. Che also explained what happened when they saw the commissary clerk exit the building. They immediately drove to the bank and Jose dropped them off so that they could all hide in their little assigned positions. And then Jose took off so that no one would be able to see his car or kind of be suspicious. But don't worry, Jose wasn't very far because he reappeared quickly after the attack began. After that night, after he dropped Jose off at the Sportodome, Che Wolford never saw Jose again. Che also discussed that once he met with police to tell them the truth, he actually did a reenactment for the investigators, meaning that he drove them from location to location so that they could see the play-by-play. He drove them onto base, to the commissary, to the parking across to buy the beers, and then back at the commissary, then the bank, and he even showed them their escape route. In addition to the witnesses I have already mentioned, the prosecution also called the friends that Simoy had fully confessed to during his 10-day flight from justice, as well as the people who helped him hide. By the way, the people who actually helped Jose hide out, they were also charged. They were charged as accessory after the fact, and they testified against Jose, hopeful to get lighter sentences. Now, this just goes to show that this case affected so many more people outside the 3 victims and the 5 men who directly participated in this crime. There were so many people across Guam who were involved in this case. Now, before I kind of wrap up with what the verdict was, I do want to point out just a few things that I found particularly interesting about the evidence. First, when Jose Simoy left his car at the auto body shop, he quite literally just abandoned it there. The body shop owner testified that they had just opened up their business. They had, no kidding, just started their business. And it was the beginning of January. They had, no kidding, just opened their doors. And their neighbor, the neighboring business, that person asked about the random car. Hey, whose random car is this? Now, the body shop, that's not our car. So they called the police to report the car illegally parked there. And within a day or 2, Air Force personnel showed up and towed it. And remember the pipe, the knife, and the beer cans that were found on the escape route? Those items weren't found immediately after the attack. They were found about a month later. And because they had sat out in the elements, there were no latent fingerprints. But the pipe, well, I had envisioned the pipe as just a metal pipe. But when it was found by investigators, it was found wrapped in black electrical tape, kind of like the way you would wrap the bottom of a bat to kind of have better grip. That's how the pipe had been wrapped, all the way from the top to the bottom. Now, I do want to talk about some other forensic evidence. Investigators did take Jose Simoy's personal vehicle and they did get a search warrant. That was a vehicle that he had abandoned. And while they were searching the vehicle, they found 2 rolls of electrical tape. Although they were not able to get any latent fingerprints from the pipe, they were able to connect the pipe directly to Jose Simoy's own personal car via 2 things. First, one of the rolls of the electrical tape found in his car matched the characteristics of the tape that the pipe was wrapped in. And second, the tape found on the pipe had carpet fibers on it that matched the carpet fibers found in Jose Simoy's personal vehicle. The evidence in this case was overwhelming, but let me backtrack real quick, and I want to discuss how the prosecution stomped on the fact that Jose Simoy was the security police, and he used his position and the knowledge that he gained from his position to ambush not only the clerk, but one of his own security police members. When the prosecution rested their case, the defense was offered an opportunity to provide an opening statement. And no kidding, this is verbatim what happened. Quote, "Your Honor, the defense will waive opening statement, and indeed we rest our case also." End quote. Yep, that's right. While the defense never, ever, ever has to put up a defense, this is a death penalty case. But they had nothing. After the presentation of the evidence, that's when we get to hear from closing arguments. And during their closing arguments, that was where the prosecution put all the pieces of the puzzle together for the jury. Now, I don't need to harp on what they said because it's basically what I've been telling you this entire two-part series. Well, Jose's defense team, on the other hand, they have a different role to play. And what they tried to do was they tried to poke holes in the prosecution's case. The defense called this an emotional case, and they pointed at investigators as quick to place blame on Jose Simoy. They said that investigators had clouded judgment and that they were framing an innocent man. The defense harped on Jose's initial statement to investigators when he was apprehended. Jose was innocent. Jose was checking his mailbox innocently at the post office. Jose ran into 4 locals who needed a ride. Jose was forced against his will to be their getaway driver. That was the entire defense argument. If anything, the defense actually conceded that maybe Jose was an accessory after the fact, but that was it. After the evidence closed, the panel, what we call the jury in a court-martial, began deliberations. But they didn't take long, and the outcome was clear. They found Jose Simoy guilty on all 4 charges. The jury was then sent home and asked to return 2 days later for sentencing.
The Lincoln Wishlist sales event is happening now. Here's what's on everyone's wish list. Enjoying holiday jingles with brilliant 3D audio that surrounds you? Check. Watching snow flurries through the panoramic vista roof? Check. Packing up presents with the spacious Lincoln Splitgate? Check. Everything you want. All standard on the 2025 Lincoln Navigator SUV. Visit your local Lincoln retailer or learn more at Lincoln.com for exceptional offers on 2025 Lincoln vehicles today.
During the sentencing phase of this case, the prosecution only called 2 witnesses to provide victim impact testimony. They called Tech Sergeant Margot, who spoke about the toll the attack had taken on him, physically, emotionally, and mentally. Yeah, he survived, but he would never be the same. He spent close to 2 weeks in the hospital after that attack. He told the jury that the muscles in his throat that were cut were pretty much severed completely, and that there was nothing in medicine that they could do to be reattached. The pain from this injury was continuous. Another thing about this is that he can no longer properly swallow without raising his chin. And the internal scars on his lungs, that is also painful. Now, one of Sergeant Levay's family members testified. I could guess who it is, but their name was redacted, so I'm not going to guess. It was definitely somebody who truly, truly loved Sergeant Levay. And that person testified about the loss in the family and how everyone was coping after Sergeant Levay passed away. Those were the only 2 witnesses called, and that's likely because most of the other evidence came out during the findings portion. The defense did not present any witnesses, but they did present 2 documents, and they were published to the jury by the defense reading them aloud. The first document was a letter from a judge advocate showing that Jose Simoy did offer to plead guilty prior to the case being fully litigated. And it literally went down one by one of all his plea offers. And I did discuss those 3 plea offers earlier, but now it was actually presented to the jury, which I found kind of odd. The second statement that was read to the jury was an unsworn statement by Jose Simoy. In the statement, read by his attorney, while Jose Simoy sat there, Jose expressed remorse for his transgressions. I initially was planning to read it to you verbatim, but honestly, the fact that he didn't even have the gall to read it himself to the members just seriously rubs me the wrong way. Dude, at this point, you are fighting for your life. Get up and at least say you're sorry. The prosecution, of course, argued to the jury that the death penalty was the most appropriate sentence. For aggravating factors, they asked the jury to consider 2 things. 1, was Jose Simoy a major participant in the robbery, and did he exhibit a reckless indifference to the value of human life? And the second aggravating factor they were asked to consider was whether the crime was committed in such a way that the lives of others were substantially endangered by Jose Simoy. The defense during their sentencing argument argued that Jose should get no more than life in prison. And they pointed to the fact that Jose has been trying to plead guilty for months, but Big Bad Air Force kept striking his request down. The defense also conceded that Jose may have been the mastermind of the robbery, but he definitely wasn't the mastermind of the murder. He wasn't planning a murder at all. The real murderer in this case, they said, was Dennis Simoy, the man who beat and killed Sergeant Levay with the pipe. After arguments, the case was handed to the jury, but they needed more time, so everyone went home without a sentence being finalized that day. On July 22, 1993, after 9 hours of deliberation, the jury came back with their decision. I do want to point out that in a capital court-martial, the death penalty must be unanimous. So everyone in that room has to agree for death in order for death to be the sentence. The jury president stood and read aloud, quote, "Senior Airman Jose F.S. Simoy, it is my duty as the president of this court to inform you that the court, in closed session and upon secret written ballot, unanimously sentences you to be put to death, to forfeit all pay and allowances, and to be reduced to the grade of E1, end quote. And with that, Jose Simoy became the first person in 44 years to receive a death sentence on Guam. After this, the convening authority approved the sentence, and Jose was transferred to the United States Disciplinary Barracks at Fort Leavenworth, Kansas. In courts-martial resulting in a death penalty, every death sentence receives immediate mandatory review. Now, that review in this case was the Air Force Court of Criminal Appeals, and they upheld both the verdict and the death sentence. There was a second review with the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Armed Forces. We call it CAF for short. And that case or that decision occurred in 1998. And here's where things changed drastically. CAF actually found that the military judge at the court-martial made a critical error during sentencing. They said that the judge failed to instruct the jury to begin voting on the least severe sentence first, which was life in prison. And that is a requirement by the rules for court-martial. Under military law, only 3/4 of the jury must agree on a life sentence. CAF reasoned that this threshold, the 3/4, might have been met if they would have started at life in prison. But because the panel, aka the jury, wasn't properly instructed by the judge on how to vote, the sentence was legally defective. So with that decision, CAF affirmed the verdict, but they reversed the death sentence. They did return the case to the Judge Advocate General for potential rehearing. Eventually, instead of relitigating the sentencing phase, Jose Simoy was resentenced to life in prison. And now he is eligible for parole. So I'm sure you want an update, right? Well, Jose Simoy was denied parole in 2021. In response, he was pissed and he filed a lawsuit in 2022 against the U.S. Parole Commission, challenging their denial. On February 20th, 2024, the court dismissed the suit without prejudice, giving Jose until July 4th, 2024 to refile. But he never did, and the petition expired. It's unclear when his next parole hearing will take place. Jose Simoy is now in his early 60s, and he's incarcerated at the federal prison in Victorville, California. His listed release date is January 9th, 2054. But seeing as he is eligible for parole, he could be released much sooner. And I know, True Crime Army, that you guys are all itching to know what happened to the other guys. Well, all their fates played out quite differently. Let me start with Dennis Simoy, Jose's brother. In May of 1992, Dennis Simoy was tried in federal court for first-degree murder and robbery. He was found guilty and sentenced to life in prison. He appealed in July of 1993, arguing that Senior Airman Joseph Davis, he was the cop that allegedly saw him crouched over with a crowbar. Well, basically, Dennis is saying that security police officer couldn't have positively identified him as the man beating Sergeant Levay. I guess he was kind of arguing mistaken identity or something like that. Like maybe it was too dark, you couldn't see who it really was or whatever. Well, Dennis Simoy's appeal was denied. But that didn't keep him from appealing again in 1997, 1999, and 2021. And this was all appeals in an attempt to vacate his conviction. All appeals were denied. But then, in May of 2022, Dennis filed a different type of petition. He filed a petition for compassionate release, and he cited a few things. He cited his age at the time of the crime, his rehabilitation, his deep remorse, and the emotional toll of serving a life sentence, which he said would, quote, suck the will to live out of many, end quote. So let's just pause and take this in. Dennis Simoy wasn't a juvenile at the time of the murder. He was 22 years old when he murdered Sergeant Levay with a lead pipe. And his alleged rehabilitation in prison? Okay, let's talk about it, y'all. This man tested positive for meth every year between 2015 and 2017. In 2018, he was caught with a weapon in prison, and he has racked up multiple infractions for fighting, refusing orders, and even possessing unauthorized items. So the federal judge's decision is not going to come as a surprise to you. His compassionate release was denied. Dennis remains incarcerated at the federal prison in Beaumont, Texas, serving a life without parole sentence. Next up, let's talk about Joseph Che Wolford. Wolford, as we heard, pled guilty to robbery. He was sentenced to 15 years in prison. And just a random fact, he had been in a California prison awaiting his sentence when they flew him to Guam to testify against Jose Simoy at his court-martial. So we couldn't confirm his current location, but given the sentence length, which was only 15 years, he was likely released years ago, possibly even decades ago. What about Jesus Ramos? You might recall that he was part of the planning, but he wasn't actually there on December 29th. He was ultimately charged with conspiracy to commit robbery for helping plan the heist and participating in the earlier attempts. He took a plea deal in exchange for testifying against Dennis in federal court and Jose at the court-martial. His plea agreement capped his sentence at probation for 3 years, but the final outcome is unclear. What about Nito and Teak Boy? Remember them? They were the two Filipino H2 guys. If you can believe this, Nito and Teak Boy have never been caught. They fled Guam, presumably returning to the Philippines, and they were never arrested or charged. As of this recording, no one knows which one of them stabbed Tech Sergeant Margot or which one of them punched Peregrina Armour and helped ambush Sergeant Levay. What we do know is that during Jose Simoy's 10 days on the run, Jose terrorized people around him by invoking Teak Boy and Nito's name, reminding all of his friends that these men had reputations as killers. Teak Boy and Nito were rumored to have been connected to 9 murders in the Philippines. Whether that's true or not, we don't know. But one thing is certain. They disappeared and they have never faced justice. Now, I want to take this time to talk about the victims after the attack. Tech Sergeant Donald Markwart was just trying to get in some Sunday work when he was attacked. He spent 11 days in the hospital, underwent multiple surgeries, and was left with permanent physical disabilities. But the psychological effects are equally devastating. He no longer trusts people, he's afraid to walk alone at night, and he lives in constant fear that danger is lurking, even around the friendliest of faces. As for Peregrina Armour, the robbery left her deeply traumatized as well. She sold her car because she was afraid to drive it. She was fearful of driving in general for a while afterwards, even after they bought a new car. And she even started calling her husband before leaving work so that he knew to come look for her if she wasn't home quickly enough. I mean, her sense of safety was shattered. Sergeant Stacy Levay was only 29 years old on the day he was attacked and ultimately lost his life. He was born on December 29, 1962 in Santa Ana, California, and he later moved to Kent, Washington. On the stand, his family member, who, like I said, I don't know because the name was redacted, his family member described him as a gentle soul, the kind of young man who rescued injured animals and always lent a helping hand. He was a type of person who would never hurt anyone. After some encouragement from his parents, Stacy left his pizza parlor job and joined the Air Force at 24 years old, choosing to enlist on his father's birthday. His father was a Marine Corps veteran of 30 years, and he was immensely proud of his son. Stacy left behind his wife, his parents, and his brother. He was laid to rest in Renton, Washington. Years later, both his father and his brother were laid to rest beside him. In 2004, Andersen Air Force Base built a new Security Forces Squadron headquarters building. They named it in honor of Sergeant Stacy Levay and Airman Lori Lucas, another defender who was killed in a 1991 training exercise. The building's name is the Lucas Levay Security Forces Building. It's a tribute to 2 defenders who gave their lives in service. True Crime Army, this case, like every other case, is so tragic. But what sets this case apart is not only the greed aspect of it, the money, but the fact that Jose Simoy used what he learned on the job as a defender, a job that is meant for good. He used that knowledge for bad. I do want to give a shout out to the Air Force for responding to our FOIA request and sending the trial transcript. And listen, y'all, 4 years? I mean, that's a lot of redacting to do. But what I did learn from reviewing the transcript is that cases were very different back in the day. Even though the trial transcript was roughly 1,300 pages, I feel like a death penalty trial transcript today would be like, I don't know, at least 5,000 to 10,000 pages. All right, everyone. I just want to thank you for sticking with me for this 2-part episode. I will be back next week with a regular size 1-part episode. And shout out to Myrtle for her help in researching and writing this episode. My sources for this episode include the official record of trial, redacted of course, various appellate opinions for Jose and Dennis Simoy, as well as reporting by Pacific Daily News. Military Murder is a Mama Margot production. The music was created by Ty-Ops. Until next time, remember, you never really know what someone is capable of, so remain vigilant always. You have a fabulous week, and I'll keep digging to bring you another military murder story next time.
Mama's working on her podcast. I don't want to.
Hey, Ryan Reynolds here. Wishing you a very happy half-off holiday because right now Mint Mobile is offering you the gift of 50% off unlimited. To be clear, that's half price, not half the service. And Mint is still premium unlimited wireless for a great price. So that means a half day, yeah? Give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
Upfront payment of $45 for 3-month plan equivalent to $15 per month required. New customer offer for first 3 months only. Speeds slow after 35 gigabytes if network's busy. Taxes and fees extra. See mintmobile.com.